at BioSci Careers, and today I have the pleasure of speaking on the topic of your resume CV getting to the yes pile. So I'm going to get started. If you have questions, just as a reminder, please save them to the very end because we will be able to answer those once we go off video. Also, just want to let you know that I will be referring really to the non-academic job search today. My colleague and our director, Stephanie Eberly, there is a video you will be able to watch on the academic job search CV and cover letter. That said, there are still some very similar and relevant pieces, whether it's an academic or non-academic job search. Okay. So today, what will we be covering? In the next 25 minutes or so, we'll be covering the what and why of resumes and CVs. WIFM, you're asking, what the heck is that, right? That's the employer perspective. What's in it for me? And we'll go over 4 key factors. So let's talk just a minute about perspective. And what do I mean by perspective? This is sort of the what's in it for me. I want you to put yourself in the perspective of a recruiter. So how long does the average recruiter take to review a resume or a CV? 3 minutes? 90 seconds or 6 seconds? I'll give you a few moments to think about it. Six seconds. How many of you got that right? And I don't know whether you did or you didn't, so you can tell me whatever you want. Shake your head. Also, I want to keep in mind that it was about 6 seconds, a little longer, that I gave you between the time I asked the question and the time that I provided the answer. So that's a really short amount of time. And this information actually comes from a study done by the Ladder, and if anybody's interested, we can post a link to where that is. You'll often hear quoted 5 to 7 seconds is about amount of time a reader will look at a CV or resume. In this study, people were looking at them more like 5 minutes, but they were being tracked on what they were actually looking at, and they found that it was actually 5 to 7 seconds before they determined whether they were in the yes or the no pile. Also, how many of you get junk mail? I don't know if you do or not. In my world, my mail comes, my feeling is everything's going to be trashed, and you have to give me a reason to keep it. Your CV and your resume is the same way. The recruiter, everything by default is in the rejection pile. And it will, we as the creators of our resumes and CVs have to give the reader a reason to actually want to keep it. So what is a CV or resume, and why do you need one? It's your customized marketing brochure. It's a key tool in your job search. You pretty much need one. It showcases and advertises your skills, knowledges, and abilities. So before a hiring manager, or recruiter, or if you're doing an informational interview, so often what you need is this document so you can get to the point where somebody will want to have that follow-up conversation with you. All right. And just as you are attracted to maybe open up a brochure from a university, a vacation spot, if you ever get to go on vacation, an automobile, purchasing a computer, your resume, it does the same thing. It's your collateral piece or your marketing piece. Okay? And whether we like to think about it this way or not, we actually are a product or a service, right? So we are selling that to our potential organizations and employers. Okay. So often the question is, okay, resume, CV, what's the difference? Well, what I have on the screen here, I took from the Pursuing Meaningful Work Strategies Guide, and this is a guide that is given to you free. It has all kinds of information about job searching. And this particular page is in that guide. And BioSci Careers and Beam, Stanford Career Education, together put out this guide. So basically, you can think of your CV as a comprehensive record of your scholarly credentials. And you want to think about that like for research teaching. A key point with a CV, though, is there's really, I don't want to say there's no limitations in length, but there's less limitations on your length. And it's used in the academic or research settings, right? A resume it's generally concise, 1 to 2 pages. It's really a selective summary of your relevant skills and experiences. And in this particular case, in a resume, you're tailoring that to, in particular, what the employer's needs are. And also the language you use, the value system, the format in the resume should align with the type of organization's work, roles, or industry you're applying to. Now this resume vitae, just to be clear, it's really not an official employer term, and we do explain that in the guide as well. It's really a hybrid, and more we see a lot of that, especially for our trainees who come in and are interested in applying to a non-academic position. And we talk about it's typically used for industry and policy. I also want to say industry sort of becomes a catch-all phrase often for non-academic. But the difference here is a resume is very skills-focused. A CV is really your comprehensive academic record. In a hybrid, your academic record also matters, right? So this is why there'll be a hybrid version. It's obviously longer than a resume, shorter than a CV. And it will often include relevant headings like publications, presentations, especially because they would be pertinent to the type of position you're applying to. Okay? Which takes me to the 4 key factors for getting to the yes pile. And you'll see relevance is number 1 on the list, and it's bolded. And that's because relevance is really the foundation for all the other components of what you choose to put on your resume and CV, because you're tailoring it. So if I could give you only one tip, which we are giving you more, but only one, is make it relevant, and then everything else should fall into place. And you might say, well, make it relevant, how do I know? Well, first is you're going to want to do your homework around either the organization you're applying to, the role, the responsibility. A job description should be the first place that you're looking. If you haven't yet found a position to apply to, yet you want to try and understand what that is, having informational interviews with folks to understand more about the industry and what their companies or organizations or those roles are looking for. Then you can go ahead and tailor after that. Okay? Second, and I gave you a sneak peek into relevance. Format is important, specificity, quantifying or defining skills and results. So let's look at number 1, the key factor. Okay, so as I've shared some of this with you already, it's really the most operative of the factors. And in this, you have really less than 30 seconds, 6 to 7, maybe a few minutes, depending on the reader, to make an impactful first impression on paper. And please note it says on paper, because if you've done that informational interview, you've actually already had an opportunity to make a first impression. And the resume is something that's going to support and reinforce what maybe you learned in that conversation, or also if somebody through conversation with you sees, oh, this person really takes initiative, likely your resume will have something on there that reinforces that. Note it's a dynamic document, okay? And what do I mean by that? It means, once it's on paper, it's there, but you can change that up for different jobs that you apply to. And I know that can be very time-consuming, but the more you can customize it, the better. And that may simply mean that you rearrange the headings in terms of how you place things on the page, okay, or the language that you use to speak about a particular role. It needs to include information and accomplishments that correspond to that role, industry, or organization. Transferable skills. This is a term we throw out a lot. What do we mean by that? Well, you potentially, in your roles now, you might analyze large, complex data sets, okay? If you're applying to a position that really is more interested in the skill set of analyzing complex data sets and maybe less interested in the particular science behind it, you want to make sure that the real estate on your resume and how you talk about that position or talk about your experiences for what you're applying to relates to, is the exact background of the science that in the context that I was analyzing data important, or is it more important that it was large amounts of data that I collaborated with numerous labs, that kind of thing, okay? And another really good example, actually we have a trainee who, and I always mispronounce this, but I'll do my best, works with flow cytometry. Okay, there we go. And she actually ended up working for a company that makes the equipment, so a flow, the equipment to use if you're going to be doing flow cytometry. And in her particular role, on her resume, yeah, she used it, so that was an important skill, but she also made sure she spoke about how she was training other people in the lab. And it wasn't just about the results and the science of using the equipment. And that was very transferable to the role that she actually has in working for that company. Okay? And again, just a reminder of the what's in it for me. And that term I actually read, David Jensen is a writer and blogger and career specialist, and he writes a lot for Science Magazine and other in the biotech field, helping PhDs, postdocs look and obtain career advice. And he refers to the WIFM a lot. Okay, so we have relevance, and then we have format. So what do we mean? And this might just look like a laundry list, but these are some key components. Is your document attractive or is it distracting? And it's so often we see documents where something is bolded, something is underlined, something is italicized, it's a different font. And you look at it and it can be very, very distracting. And really I understand why we do that. We do that because we want to give something a little more attention. And it's sort of like when you read materials and you highlight it. I don't know if you ever do this. I take a highlighter, I highlight what I think is most important, and the next thing I know is now I have to underline because I highlighted too much. So the purpose of highlighting something is to figure out what are those key components that I want to highlight, and how am I making that your eye draw to that point as opposed to being distracted. Grammatical errors. Just this past weekend, I was volunteering and critiquing resumes for some first-gen college students in college access programs. And I happened to be sharing a table and overheard a woman who worked at Abbott Laboratories. And I spoke to her afterwards, but she said to the student, oh, the absolute first thing I look for is spelling errors. If there's a spelling error, my feeling is that person did not spend the time and attention that they needed. And I caution you, and I asked her, do you really do that? And I did ask her what kinds of positions she hires for, and she's in the marketing department. However, she was adamant, whether scientists or not, that's important. And we all use spell checks. We need to be careful with spell check. Are we using the right or the wrong version of the word there, for example? And it's so easy when you look at your document over and over again, you don't even see those anymore. So even if somebody isn't a specialist like we are in BioSci careers, you can have somebody read it for spelling errors. And you want consistent formatting. So if you put the title first, then the name of the organization, then the location, then the dates, you want to do that for each of the experiences within that section. You want an efficient use of space. And that doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to crouch it out, use every piece of white space on this paper, especially if we told you you want to keep it to 1 to 2 pages. So are you lining things up so that you can actually maximize the number of words on a line? Use of headings and sections, and I'll go into that in a little more detail, but you have the opportunity to shape the lens within which somebody is reading your materials. So what do I mean by that? So what are you going to call your headings, right? There's some headings you pretty much need, right? So you have education. Are you going to call your section research experience? Or are you going to call it research and project management experience? Because many people's research is also project management. So think about your opportunity to shape the way I'm going to read the materials, okay? The order of your sections. What's most important, right? So if somebody wants publications, I would say move that higher up on the list if you're going to keep it at all, versus having it as the last section. It would be a little odd, though, to have publications be the very first section on your resume. And then the other part is bullet points. Bullet points are actually easier to read. And the other thing about a resume is everything we teach you about good grammar, it goes out the window, right? Because you don't need to start a resume, and you shouldn't start a sentence with I. We know it's you, right? So start with an action word, okay? So that, I managed, I discovered, I co-created, I developed. And those are great starting words on the bullet points. And if you choose to put it in a paragraph, that's okay too. It still doesn't need full sentences. Paragraphs you can get a little more words in there than with bullet points. Just know they're a little harder to read. And you generally don't want more than 6 bullet points under a heading. Reverse chronological order. You start with the most recent first. And that's another reason people choose the headings that they choose, because the headings, if you have something that maybe you did 5 years ago, but it's really relevant, I would pick a heading that allows me to put that experience higher up and not get lost. Okay. I'm not going to go through all of these. These are just up there to give you reinforce the point that there are typical headings. You need to have contact information. You don't call it contact information. Like, you don't need to title it CV or resume. You put your name, definitely an email, a LinkedIn. I am very pro LinkedIn and highly recommend you have a LinkedIn on your contact information. Do you need an address? There are times where it makes sense. If you're moving to an area where maybe you're from there, you have a permanent address, you have a connection there, then somebody knows, okay, she's actually going to stay on the East Coast even though she's been living in California for 15 years. She knows what the weather's like. And then there are, so there's typical research experience, work experience, education, and then there's other. And this is where you're going to pick something that is either catch-all for some of the experiences you want to have on there. Maybe that's leadership. Maybe it's accomplishments. So you just want to make sure that you're choosing a heading that reflects and catches everything that's below it. Okay. I have highlighted out summary qualifications because this is by far one of the most important ways you can start. So after your contact information, you used to see objective on resumes, like my objective is seeking a challenging position in the biotech field where I can be challenged and utilize my skills and experiences. That really is sort of a waste of real estate, right? However, I can do a summary of qualifications which tells in a short blip who I am and how I can add value, and it's going to summarize the skills, knowledges, and experiences. So even though your entire CV and resume is acknowledging that, I actually think of it as it's the trailer to the movie. It's the abstract to your talk. So this is your summary of qualifications. Okay. Less is more. I actually took this from an article on jobs in the New Scientist magazine, and it was tips for writing a resume. But I redid it, but I love this graphic, less equals more. And even though we're going to be telling you momentarily how you want to be specific and quantify and give details on your CV and resume, you want to make sure that you're not overdoing it in terms of bullet points, filling space, like I said, highlighting. First and foremost, you want it to be easily read, I should say easily skimmed, because I don't know who reads in 6 seconds, right? So it's really being skimmed. So am I going to be able to capture what I need, okay? And then if you're in the yes pile, then somebody's going to spend more time looking at it at some point. So I don't want you to say, oh, it's not, I don't need to put that there because nobody's ever going to read it. You want to get to the point where it is read. Okay? So let's talk about key factor number 3. That's be specific. So the reader doesn't know you necessarily. Now, if you've done some networking and informational interviewing, they might, yet they still want to be reminded about that. So you want to be specific to illustrate how you bring value, right? And we've spoken a lot about relevancy already, but will the reader understand the context within which you had this experience, right? What was your level of responsibility? Did you provide enough about the results? Are they able to comprehend what you did when they read these bullet points? Because sometimes people read it and they go, I don't know what you did, right? So you want to make sure you're sharing enough specificity that I, as the reader, understand what you did. So an example, excellent communication skills. We know employers want communication skills, but it's a little vague, versus the reader wouldn't know from the top one that your team is in different countries, you work remotely, you deal with cultural differences. However, if you say, we held weekly virtual meetings and communicated remotely with a diverse 5-person team across the 3 countries made up of engineers, academic researchers, and a marketing director to develop strategies, motivate, and support, resulting in delivering over $50,000 project on schedule and under budget. Now, I will say that's a little wordy. I might put that in 2 bullet points. However, you see the difference between the vagueness of excellent communication skills, and now I, as the reader, have much more insight into your level of responsibilities, the scope of your work, and what you can actually do for me in my organization. What's in it for me? WIFM. So another example, I teach at Stanford, versus talking about the years, the degree levels you teach, that you work independently, that you can change your style to different learners, right? And that there's a positive rating by 98% of the students. So that gives me much better knowledge about you beyond you have taught. Okay. So I want to just point out the guide. This is what it looks like, the Pursuing Meaningful Work. On page 16, we have sample resumes. Page 41, we have sample CVs. And page 18 has a wonderful list of action verbs, which are a great way to even begin figuring out, how am I going to write about this experience? I often open that page for trainees and say, I tell you, check mark every one of these you've done. Now, you're not going to put all of them in your CV, but you can see people's relief of, oh, okay, I could finish this sentence now. I developed this. I managed, I taught. Okay, so to get to key factor number 4, quantify, define skills and results. Okay, again, this is, all of this builds upon the relevant, right? And quantify is a deeper dive to being specific. Okay, so numbers and results are very easily understood and they're very persuasive, right? So the more we can quantify, and I know you can't always do it, but when you can, it's a really good strategy. So if you received a scholarship, out of how many students were there? If you developed a new protocol, is it still being utilized? Did what you implement or the tool you create for gathering data in your lab, did it increase the efficiency, did it make the process faster, right? How did that make a difference in terms of what you did? Sometimes you just don't know. If you don't know, yet you still had a good experience, I wouldn't tell you to keep it off. I would just say if you can figure out a way to quantify it or provide scope, that's great. And we can help you do that as well. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example here, and you might be asking, okay, why is there an example about developing a poker app for a course project? This example is here for two reasons. One, it's an example of quantifying your skills. Two, it's a great example of transferable skills. And often people will say, well, I used to have some computer experience. I haven't done that since I was an undergrad or when I took a master's level course and actually developed this poker app with some friends because on the side I actually play a lot of poker, right? So this would be a time where something you do on the side or personal would be advantageous to put on here, where usually we don't put what I do in my personal time on here, yet it's a transferable skill if it's a role where I want somebody to know I could develop an app. And so again, this shows an example of how they conceptualized and developed it. Those are two key words, right? And that they worked with other colleagues to do it, and that it had over 30,000 combinations of play. So I understand this person can work with complexity. Okay. Now, I added this slide because I can't tell you how often this issue of conflicting advice, right? So what do you do if you have somebody look at your materials and they give you one piece of advice and somebody else tells you something really different? And if you want to do show of hands, you can. But 10 different people can look at your document and you can have 10 different variations on that advice. When I critique CVs and resumes, I will, and actually most kinds of job development conversations with trainees, first thing I'll say is, if I don't, hold me accountable to give you the why behind the feedback that I gave you. Because the why is going to be where we figure out whether or not it's relevant, right? So if there's conflicting advice, understand the whys behind it. Don't put somebody on the defensive that, you can do it in a way, oh, help me understand that. I might not say, oh, I have heard 6 different pieces of advice. My professor told me this and you told me that. I wouldn't do it that way. But why is absolutely the most important question, right? Because then you can determine whether or not it makes sense for me to put the fact that I developed a poker app on my CV or not. So in closing, if you have any questions, you can email bioscicareers@stanford.edu. We want you to apply what you have learned today here and or tonight if you're watching this at 2 a.m. Or any of our other videos that you're watching. We have one-on-one and group appointments which you can schedule through our handshake system. We encourage you to subscribe to our BioSci Careers newsletter. We have a calendar link on our webpage, and also there are events also posted in our same registration handshake system going on through BioSci Careers and around campus that may be relevant to you. Thank you.